Okay, so now we'll start looking at these mesh networks. You're probably wondering what these were. You have been dealing with some of these effects um, with the instancing and stuff like that, and it's a whole different way of kind of compositing or instancing geometry for motion graphics and for like physics, basically. But they're really fun and they're pretty basic to kind of get started with. There's a lot to them, a lot more that you can do, especially with animating and any kind of motion graphic type images that you want to kind of portray. That instead of modeling, for instance, I have these triangles here, all instance off one triangle here, and I have them in a radial blur basically. So I actually have a signal network on them, so they kind of are based upon the strength and the noise of the actual signal. So if I play the timeline, you can see starting stuff to move, and you can kind of control like the radial. You can basically animate anything within Maya. So you can do that. Say if you wanted to go back to your network here. Randomize rotation, the distribute. You can change this to a spherical. However you want to distribute them, linear, add points, non-points. I always like the radial, that was cool. If you could control the basic radius of everything. Yeah, so let's get started with this. I'm gonna start a new network, kind of go over a few little networks here. Don't save. So you have in the top left, you have a mesh network. You can use that. Sometimes I get lost on my outliner, so I don't really use it that much, but you'll need to use it for certain things, I guess. But we'll just keep it like that. So I'm going to go down here and create a triangle like I just had. So as we learned with the end particles how to instance, we're going to be using this basically this same rule, in other words. So if you go to your mesh tab up here, you can probably best to, instead of create a mesh network, probably best to open the box up here first so you can see what's going on. Now I want to create an instancer. I don't want to create mesh. If you were to create more mesh, that basically you're creating more geometry. So I would stick with instancer first because it's going to be less heavy on your graphics card, and you won't be able to. Everything will have to be separately materialized. Basically, if you had a standard surface shader, everything's going to run off this one object, but there are ways of baking the frame so you can kind of separate them or convert them to basically mesh itself. So we're just going to apply, and right off the bat something hits default. You've got this grid here. It's pretty easy to, it adds you a distribute, basically what it is. So you can change this distribute to radial, add more points in there, spherical, which is basically a sphere based upon a sphere, randomized shapes in there. These different ones I haven't really messed with a lot, but the grid's pretty easy to understand, so we'll stick with that. So you've got your distance here. I'm going to add more to the grid. Let's just say 5. Oh, actually, let's go 5, 5, 5. I want to separate these a little bit more, the distance. Let's actually add more. Nope, let's go 8. So now I have your grid system, which you can kind of, if you're happy with it, that's cool. So now you can start, what we're doing is we're adding these nodes over here of this mesh system. If you go to this mesh here in the outliner, you can kind of see these different nodes that you can add, and each one of these has different attributes. You have your offset, your random, the signal, which I had the signal in the last one, which was making it bounce. Flight's pretty detailed. Flight's actually kind of like a flock of birds or a flock of fish, maybe. Kind of gives us all a randomly, then you can kind of control the placement of it. So let's go to this right here so we can see our node now. this is your mesh editor basically. Every time you add a node in here, you can turn the node on or off, or click on it to actually get to the actually attributes here. So first I will look at the randomize. Let's put a randomize on this thing, see what happens. This is a random here. Add random node. So now basically it's giving you different positions of it, which you can all adjust these right here, your rotation. So if you've got like a big bag, something like that, like a pile of something you want to just kind of like show in a pile, you know, you can just randomize the noise of it and kind of treat it like that. Let's look at the strength down here. So then you're looking down here, you look at this fall off object, and this is good for like kind of busting stuff through. If you go down here and like create a fall off object, you created this random thing right here now. Now you've got this controller here that basically controls that random distribute just by basically this controller right here. So you can look at your random here. You can change it to like say cube, and this is really good for animating, you know, especially if you just want to like make something kind of bust through or kind of like have a few be distorted. You can kind of adjust that and the small fallout zone there. You can invert the fall off basically, so this kind of straightens them up as they go through. You can have the remove, which, hold on, let's go to add. Add basically just distorts them and they don't remove. I'll need to back up for that. So yeah, it's really fun to kind of like distort these things. But if you notice, they're just kind of like pushing into place. Let me turn this thing up a little bit or scale up my. They're just kind of pushing into place whenever you push this thing through here. Well, you can kind of control that with like adding certain things like mesh network, adding like a spring. Have a spring node. So now if you notice, they got a little bit better fall off whenever they kind of move through here. Pretty nice. So let's look at some more of these things. How did I get all those things to bounce while ago? The signal is kind of like using a alternate signal to control them, and this is kind of with the animation timeline. So I will crank this up to 1000, and let's just add a signal in here. Add a signal node. So you have different signal types: looping noise, trigonometry. Let's do just a 4D noise. I'm just going to run it. Now already we've got a bounce now, and so then you can kind of be controlling like your different scale of things, how it's now it's scaling up and scaling down, the rotation of it, your position basically, which will kind of get a little crazy. The noise settings, you can kind of, you know, how you control this noise, like the strength of it's big because you can kind of actually turn it down. Trigonometry settings, if you enable the step, if you turn that off, you're basically affecting the whole thing. That's kind of the way I've kind of described that instead of just one. So, but there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. I don't think the fall off object or this object here will work with it, because basically I need to be animating, control it, but then, yeah, you can animate while it's doing it maybe. Like hit S on the timeline. that. So, but yeah, this is how you can kind of control that and kind of play around with different settings. Let me go back to that and turn the enable step back off. So you notice you can't select this instancer, or you can't select your system that you've created, only really your instancer. You'll move everything there, but it's easier to actually create a transform and do that. So if we go to your mesh, your transform, add a transform node. Now you can go there. The only thing about the transform node is that you can go and you can type in the position up here. But here's an easy way to kind of do this, to kind of be able to control it, especially like if you have like a bunch of random like little bees or something that you've created that kind of you want to kind of animate the whole hive moving at one time. Like this thing was moving here and you want to kind of move it around. You can do the position here, type it in, and it starts to move, but actually it's just as easy to go up to create and create a locator. Then take that locator, go to your transform, and you want to drag middle mouse key, you want to drop this locator into the transform. So now that you have your locator selected, you can kind of move the whole thing around. So if you wanted to animate this locator now, it's a little bit easier, kind of like using controls when it comes to rigging and stuff like that. So if I animated that locator, moved it, you got like their whole little swarm kind of moving. It's really fast, but you know, you get the idea. Let's look at maybe one more. What do we got left? Replicator. You basically replicate the whole network. Select this. Replicants. You can offset it however you want to. It really starts dragging on your. I'm really slowing down now because there's a signal node on all these replicants and it's just trying to process it all. So when it comes to that kind of stuff, you really need to know how much you're actually doing. You know, even with instancing, basically, it still can start to time or really dig on your GPU. So I'm gonna see if this can get this flight thing to work. It's usually kind of I'm gonna delete all these right here. I don't need the transform. I don't want the signal node on there. Oh, if you just want to delete these things, just right click and delete. I don't want them on there because all I really need is that. I'm gonna delete this right here. Just get rid of my locator. I'm gonna go to my distribute and take it down just a little bit. Let's go 5, 5, 5. Now, if you do any kind of digging, research-wise on the flight mode in, let me find like a tutorial, flight mode in my mesh. There's all kinds of cool ways that you can kind of make schools of fish kind of fly by and stuff like that. I mean, the people have did this, you know, for a few years now. It's really fun. It's really kind of an easy way to kind of like making a background kind of start to move, but it's a little bit hard to kind of conceptualize like just right off the bat. So the best thing to do is kind of keep it small. Let's go to the mesh system and add it. Add flight node. Starts to compile everything now. Kind of back here. you'll see how everything's kind of randomly in this control thing, and this is your main controls basically, and your speed and your mass of it. So it's best to kind of stay small with it and just kind of like run these things down a little bit. Where now I'm adjusting everything like this. And if you did have a transform, you can kind of move basically the whole flock as you're going along. So, like I said, this is a whole class in itself, the whole flight node, which, you know, it can get pretty in detail, especially if you have animations on some of these things, like fish, if you have them kind of slightly moving. But it's really fun. It's really kind of a cool way to kind of expand the network of the MASH thing. Now, the last thing I'll show you is how to bake these things, basically, so you can have different, this whole network as a piece of geometry, in other words. So if you go to your MASH, like you have your instancer selected, or your whole network, basically. MASH utilities, bake instancer to objects. Actually, probably need to select the instancer. This box right here is going to come up. I kind of like this frame here that I have it on here. I want to be able to kind of create this as a new geometry system that I'll be able to kind of individually put materials and stuff on. I'll just go bake this frame. $9.49. So now it's created this whole system over here of all the geometry that you can kind of go about and select and move in space. You can materialize these things individually, whatever you need to do. So yeah, so like I said, the MASH network can get really crazy. I've seen people do simulations like with different animations. They'll bring in rigs and have crowds of people by using the MASH network. I've seen that done before, mainly with, like, you know, birds, bees, any kind of like animation you have that you kind of want the computer to depend on the algorithm to kind of create for you. It's a good way to kind of really get into the whole instancing fact, and it's really better for your GPU than like sitting there animating every single object. So explore it. Use your MASH editor. Like I said, the MASH network is up here at the top left. You'll just need to kind of keep your original piece of geometry, if you're going to be messing with it just with a piece of geometry, kind of keep it a low poly so you can kind of start adding these nodes. Then every time you select the node here, you got all your attributes over here, and you can actually turn, you can have these. I probably didn't have to delete all those nodes earlier. I probably could just like turn them off, and then you've got just, you know, just now a piece of geometry here, so I can select this and move all this stuff around if I wanted to. So okay, well, thanks for watching, and yeah, see you next time.